"You don't know me," she whispered beneath the burlap sack, her voice rough but defiant. "And still you speak as if you'd claim me." The words startled Ethan Cole, for he hadn't expected speech from a figure on the platform. The men of Cedar Hollow had been jeering too loud, spitting insults sharp as nails. The woman's wrists were bound, her shoulders straight, and though her head was covered like contraband, her dignity leaked through the coarse cloth. Trader Silas Boone laughed oily into the crowd, waving his hands like a showman hawking broken wares. "Rejected bride. Scar goods. We'll take her for less than a mule's feed." Pennies clinked, boots stamped, laughter rolled. Ethan had come for flour, salt, maybe tobacco if his coin stretched. Months in the mountains had hollowed him, and hunger had driven him down. But hunger was not what opened his mouth in that charged moment. $10 slipped out like confession, silencing the crowd. Boone's eyes gleamed. The gavel fell. The woman was his. Ethan untied her wrists himself, lifted her light as dry, kindling onto his horse, and left the square under the town's gossiping eyes. They said the mountain man was a fool, and maybe he was, but fools often change the course of things. That night, in his cabin, with firelight pressing shadows against rough-hewn logs, Ethan cut the rope, tugged away the sack. Auburn hair tumbled uneven, hacked as if by punishment. A scar carved one cheek like a cruel signature. But her eyes, one green, one brown, were no deformity. They were a challenge. She held his gaze without blinking, and Ethan, who had trapped wolves, seen storms rip forests, nearly flinched. She was not broken, only branded by survival. "My name's Lila," she said softly. Then, harder, "You paid for me. You're free," Ethan replied. His voice carried more gravel than certainty. "Stay only if you choose." For a moment, silence owned them. Then, to his astonishment, she smiled, small, crooked but real. He had not seen a smile in months that wasn't cruel. The sight cut through him sharper than hunger. Days passed in quiet rhythm. Lila learned the spring's path, fetched water with a pail too heavy for her frame, but carried anyway. Ethan chopped wood, his shoulders steady, his words few. Silence became their common tongue. But in small gestures, her setting a cup by his hand before he asked, his draping his coat over her shoulders on a cold night, something unspoken grew. It was not romance from the dime novels stacked in saloon corners. It was survival stitched into tenderness. But Cedar Hollow carried gossip quicker than wildfire. By winter, word reached Garrett Kane. He was a rancher with polished boots and a pride blacker than coal, the kind of man who treated people like possessions. Lila had once been his prize, until he cast her aside. Now the thought of her choosing another burned him more than losing her ever had. He sent word, then law, then threats. Marshal Elijah Harper rode up one morning through frostbitten grass, hat brim heavy with snow. His voice was tired, like a man forced to bear messages he didn't believe. "Ethan Cole, you know why I'm here. Papers say she belongs to Kane." Ethan's jaw tightened. A person don't belong. Harper looked at Lila, then back at Ethan, reluctant. "Only way to keep Kane from claiming her is marriage." "Sign, witnessed." Ethan turned to Lila. He didn't kneel, didn't dramatize. His voice was plain, the way a man asks if dawn will come. "Not to shield you only, to share a life. Do you choose me?" Her eyes glistened in the lamplight. She breathed once, twice, then said, "Yes." So Harper scratched it in the record book, and with one quiet vow, 2 exiles became bound. Yet vows are no shield against prideful men. Kane arrived by spring with hired guns, 7 shadows stretching across the valley. His threats were not loud, but cruel in their patience. Fences burned. A neighbor's well was poisoned. Chickens disappeared. The message was clear. Ethan and Lila were unwelcome. Fear crept into the cabin like smoke that never cleared. At night, Lila's hands shook as she scrubbed pans, the metal clattering too loud. Ethan whittled wood into splinters with no shape. But even under the press of dread, their bond deepened. She began humming as she mended shirts. He began laughing at her jokes, small and bent as they were. In terror's shadow, they found slivers of joy. Then came the rabbit nailed to their door. A message of cruelty Kane's men thought clever. Lila broke then. "He'll never stop," she whispered, packing her few belongings. "I've brought you nothing but danger." She turned to leave, but Ethan only said, quiet as prayer, the mountains cold without you. His words, so simple, cut deeper than chains. She stayed, but hope thinned. Cain's men pressed harder. Townsfolk muttered that Ethan was mad, protecting a scarred woman cursed. Lila began to doubt her worth. Nights she sat by the fire, staring at her scar's shadow on the wall. Ethan would not speak flowery comfort. Instead, he placed her hand against his, rough palm to rough palm, as if to say, "We are both marked, both chosen, both enough." The storm finally broke at dawn, silent and heavy. Cain arrived with 6 riders. Their guns shone, their faces tight with doubt. For waiting on the porch was not Ethan alone. Lila stood beside him, shotgun steady in her scarred hands. Cain sneered, his voice dripping venom. "You think scars make you strong? You're still nothing. You'll always be mine." Her voice cut back, sharp as glass, better scarred than owned. The hired guns shifted uneasily. They had followed Cain for coin, but coin doesn't buy respect. Ethan stood quiet, rifle in hand but eyes calm. The silence grew unbearable, heavy as judgment. Cain's fury cracked under it. With a curse, he wheeled his horse. The men followed, not loyal but weary. They disappeared into dust, pride limping beside them. When the last hoofbeat faded, the valley exhaled. Smoke curled from the cabin chimney, as if heaven itself sighed relief. Lila lowered her shotgun, breath trembling. Ethan set his rifle down, reached for her hand. "You stayed," he murmured. Her mismatched eyes softened. "You gave me the choice." They stood together, scarred yet unbroken. What had begun as purchase had become something else, something chosen. Cedar Hollow whispered their names for years, calling it madness or mercy. But truth, quieter than gossip, lived in the valley, dignity carved from disgrace, love born not of beauty but of endurance. In the weeks after Cain's retreat, the cabin settled into a fragile peace. Snow melted into muddy rivulets. Wildflowers burst reckless along the slopes, and the mountains seemed to breathe easier. Lila planted a garden, pressing seeds into soil with the reverence of someone learning hope again. Ethan built her a bench outside, rough pine smoothed by his knife, where she could sit at dusk and watch the valley gather shadows. Sometimes he joined her, silent except for the match striking his pipe, both of them watching darkness fall not as threat but as curtain. Yet nights carried unease. Coyotes yipped in the distance, and each sound made Lila's hand hover near the shotgun by the door. Ethan, half in dreams, would murmur, "We're safe," though safety was a word he never believed fully. He knew Cain's pride was a wound that healed crooked, the kind that festers. But he also knew the power of waiting, of meeting life steady as stone. One evening, a storm rolled across the valley, thunder shaking the hills like distant cannon fire. Lila sat close to the hearth, tracing the scar on her cheek with absent fingers. Ethan watched her, words gathering like stubborn cattle before a gate. At last he said, "That scar, it ain't what I see first." She looked up, startled, and for a heartbeat he feared he had spoken too much. But her eyes softened, tears catching firelight, and she whispered, "Then maybe I can learn to see myself as you do." The months became seasons. Fear lingered, but no longer ruled them. Neighbors, once wary, began to stop by. Mrs. Mayfield with a loaf of bread, young Tom Harper with nails for fence repair. Slowly, Cedar Hollow adjusted its stories. The scarred woman became the mountain wife, strong as the pines. The hermit trapper became a husband who had carved a home out of both timber and trust. Together, Ethan and Lila wrote a tale not with ink, but with endurance, teaching the town what it meant to love by choice, not chance. And if you ride through that country at dusk, you may see smoke rising still, the mountain keeping watch over 2 souls who chose each other against the world. Remember this, rider, scars are not shackles. They are maps of survival, leading you home. What begins in shame may end in grace, if given the chance. What begins as chains may yet become wings, if chosen with love.